Hey guys, welcome to the Fisher Fitness Coaching Podcast. This is episode 45. So this episode was really interesting, in-depth episode where I invited on Paul Standell. He is an online coach as well as a coach's coach. So he coaches PTs, online coaches to become a lot better at what they do. He has a really good business, the PT Project. So Paul has a wealth of knowledge, hence why I thought it'd be really cool to invite him on. So this episode, we touched on the challenges of coaching clients with busy schedules and stress, strategies for helping clients navigate complex emotions and behaviours. So we went into human psychology, the impact of attention, likability and problem-solving ability on client engagement, the role of marketing and personal training in online coaching success. So if you're a personal trainer or an online coach, this could be very useful for you. He even touched on creating engaging content to build relationships and rapport with the audience. And then we went into more detail on misinformation and how that spreads due to emotional appeal and human nature, the challenge in knowing what information is correct on social media, the strategy of trial and error in trying different approaches when it comes to reaching your goal, and finally, the acknowledgement of uncertainty in the future of social media and the need to adapt. So this episode has it all. Really, really interesting episode. Here it is. Enjoy. I was at one of your Muscle Mentor weekends. It made me realize how little I know. I left the whole weekend thinking, fuck, I thought I knew a fair bit. You know, it opens your mind to so much more. And you're like, fuck, I need to know more.
I think when you're getting into anything, you often believe you know more than you do. That kind of Mount Stupid, as it's often known, or Dunning-Kruger, depending on which way you want to approach it. But like, I think I know training. I understand this stuff. And you know, when I first started getting into biomechanics, I remember the same feeling of fuck. I remember being asked the question of like, why is a dumbbell lat raise hardest when your arm is held out to your side rather than sort of by your side? And going, I don't actually know. And I feel like I should know the answer to that because it definitely is harder out there. I've done enough lat raises to go, yes, that's harder out there. But the 10 kilos is still 10 kilos. That's not changed. So it's not like it got heavier, but it feels heavier. So what the, I've been a trainer for 7 years at this point. Why surely I should know the answer to this question. And you know, that feeling is a little uncomfortable, and then actually with the right teacher, an exciting feeling, because it's a bit where you start to then go, oh, this whole world opens up in front. And then I think to stay as a trainer for an extended period of time, you have to feel somewhat excited and you have to feel like you're progressing. And I think this is true of any career. If you're not progressing in one way or another, you will stagnate, you will get bored, you will lose enthusiasm, you will become apathetic. And so that progression can happen in terms of more client results. It can happen in terms of feeling like you know more and your skills are improving. It can feel like you're earning more money, but something has to be improving 90% of the time, or you will lose love of what you do, in which case you should have just gone and worked in an office, because potentially it's a more secure career. So yeah, I think that's one of those nice feelings. I like that feeling, and I try to find it more frequently these days.
Definitely. I think that's why I fell in love with it, because there's so much I still don't know, and there's so much I want to know. I want to find out. And you're right. Whenever after that weekend, I was buzzing for months, just trying to work, trying all these new tools. I was buying all the stuff. You know, I was trying to put everything into place for my clients and stuff. But this is also why I've been chatting to you about the PT Project weekend. So I'm interested, because I know that it will boost my inspiration, I suppose, for the coaching. I don't do much face-to-face anymore. It's mainly online. I'm sure it will give me some motivation to continue to learn.
I think sometimes PTs have an idea that Gen Pop clients are lower quality, right? Sometimes like we talk about high-end clients, and people often mean athletes and bodybuilders and stuff like that. But my contention is that it's easy to work with those people, generally speaking. They're very good. They're very committed. They pick things up quickly. It's a big part of their life, and they will work their life around their training, around their diet. They will go and implement half of the ideas that you come up with almost immediately. And Gen Pop people don't do any of that. They do not pick up exercises quickly. You show them an exercise and they attempt to recreate it, and it looks absolutely nothing like the exercise you just showed them. They don't understand half the words you use. They won't stick to half of the things that you thought were a good idea from a dietary perspective. They will keep drinking. They'll go on holiday, and they will test you in a way, and your skill set in a way that high end, quote unquote, clients won't. And so to me, I go, well, who's harder to work with? Who requires more skill then, really? I would say the people who are harder to get a result with require more skills than people who are easier to get a result with. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of skills working with bodybuilders or working with athletes. I'm not making that argument, right? I'm just saying that we look down on Gen Pop unnecessarily. And Gen Pop make up 99.99999% of the audience that any trainer will work with, whether that's online or in person. And the skills required to work with them are broad. They're broad skills. You need a lot of ones of different types. You need a lot of training tools in the toolbox, meaning they can't just squat, bench, and deadlift all the time. They might be able to, but they might not. So what do you give them if they can't do the classic powerlifting movements? They go to a gym that is probably a normal gym that therefore doesn't have that many options. So how do you make the most out of fewer things? They probably train at busy times. So some of the supersets that might have sounded like a great idea in your head aren't going to be as feasible, practically speaking. They're going to have more niggles. So their shoulder hurts. They've got some low back pain. They've got the knees of an arthritic 95-year-old dead guy. So, how do you work with them on that to create something where they go, oh, my knee feels better and my quads are growing? So you need a load of tools in the toolbox to be able to adjust things practically to the realities of that specific individual in front of you. So do you understand exercises in the way we started this conversation with in order to do that? So that's part of it. Do you understand how to actually listen to a human being, hear them, see how they see the world rather than projecting what you want? Coaches are notorious for being annoyed and frustrated that their client did not stick to the thing they said they would stick to. And, then being like, well, the fuck not? It's just, why can't they just stick to this fucking diet? Right. And then being frustrated with them and then kind of ranting and not really helping. If your client isn't sticking to something, there could be a whole bunch of reasons for that. And rather than trying to problem solve immediately, have you really tried hard to understand what's going on in their life? Right. Because people overeat for a whole variety of reasons, most of which aren't because they're that hungry, frankly. It's because they're lonely, sad, depressed, sometimes excited, right? Whatever. And, if someone eats because they're lonely, talking about how satiating a potato is probably isn't going to deal with the root of the issue. But how do you get a client to open up to you about those things? Well, first off, you can't get them to. You can't make them. We can't make anyone change anything. We can influence how likely they are to change. I can influence how likely they are to be honest with me about what they're eating. But the way that you do that is by building rapport with a client, by being human with a client. And that means being specifically open and honest about the shit in your life that you've struggled with or that your clients have struggled with. And that can mean everything from the content that you create to the interactions you have on WhatsApp to the check-ins that you give them and everything in between. Because people respond to examples that they recognize themselves in. Meaning, if someone overate, right? Oh, I ate too much. Okay, lots of people say that, but it's a bit vague and it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, we all overeat. Doesn't really encourage someone to be honest with you. Describing, how your overeat on that particular day involved buying 2 Easter eggs, getting a KFC Mighty Bucket for one, a whole large bag of popcorn, a Ben and Jerry's half-baked, because, then you get the sweet spot of both 2 tubs, really. And then being ashamed of what you did, not wanting your partner to find out how much you just fucking ate, and so burying the wrappers in the bin a bit deeper down and covering them back over with other stuff so that they won't know. That's the kind of specific example and story that someone might smile, laugh at, and feel more comfortable opening up to you about. And whether we then talk about content creation, the biggest problem that trainers have is it's unspecific. They just say, do you struggle for time? Do you overeat? And they don't give a specific example that anyone could relate to. And it's the whether it's coaching or content or whatever, we relate to specific examples. So if you want someone to be open with you about the reality of how they're eating, do you create specific content that they might go, oh, I see myself in that? Do you have conversations with them that are specific so they go, oh, yeah? Do you make it seem like it's human and like it's okay to have done that sometimes? Not so that you do it all the time, but so that they go, oh, I can tell Rich this, right? And if you do all that stuff, cool, maybe you've got a better chance of someone being open and honest with you about it. And that's hard. Those are soft skills. They're not easy things to do. So all of that stuff is covered on the Gen Pop coaching clinic. There's in-person lead generation. There's some online lead generation stuff. What we wanted to do with it, and it's a coaching clinic, like we wanted it to be a workshop. There's lots of stuff you can watch online, but it's my contention that the way you get better at all this stuff is not just by watching someone do it, but by practicing stuff with, and then getting feedback on what you're doing well and what you could improve on from someone that you respect. And so that's what we wanted to kind of create. And so whether you're a beginner, your first year of training someone, or you've been doing it 5, 6, 7, 10 years, there should be stuff that you can practice and take away. And if we look at the last one that we ran, one of my clients, Tony, who wasn't a client before he came to the event, Tony runs a gym with a couple of members of staff and what have you. I've known of Tony and interacted with Tony for over 10 years myself in the industry. Right. He's similar age. He's actually a couple of years older than me. But he came up afterwards and was like, dude, that was great. There was so much practically useful stuff. And it also reinforced a bunch of the things that I've learned myself across the 10 years. I think when working with Gen Pop, a lot of coaches get caught up in what I would call the minutia, whether that's, specific nutrition debates about when to time something or what exact carb fat ratio to use, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, dude, you're dealing with someone who isn't sticking to a fucking basic ass diet idea. The minutia doesn't matter, right? What we need to find is something that someone can practically stick to, and we need strategies for when we work with them. How might we come up with something they can practically stick to? How do we find out the situations they struggle with when they struggle to say no to a biscuit in the office? Are there things that we can do with them that might make it more likely that they can say no to a biscuit in the office, right? That's what we need to practice within that, not the debate as to whether it's 1.6 grams per kilogram for protein or 2.2. It's like, it fucking honestly doesn't matter for the vast majority of clients. And yet that's the shit we end up debating online most of the time in the fitness space. Same thing is true of training. Discussions of optimal and, the best. It's like, honestly, they don't matter that much when working with the vast majority of people. It's what feels good for this person. That feels so much nicer in my shoulder. Cool. Good enough for me. Let's run that. Does it work with the target tissue? Yes. Does it feel good for the person? Yes. Do they like it? Yes. Then it's perfect. Right. And all the other stuff doesn't matter. But you have to be able to evaluate lots of things in order to be comfortable doing that, I think. So, yeah. So whether it was Tony 10 years in, or I would still say that 60, 70% of the people there are in their first couple of years. And that is likely who it will benefit the most because you've got the least experience, the most still to learn. But I would still say, hopefully, that there are lessons to take, even if you've been doing it a decade plus type thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, pretty much everything you said there, I can relate to, and I completely understand where you're coming from. Because I used to think before I was like years ago when I first started, I used to think bodybuilder coaches were like amazing. They were the best sort of. They knew what they were doing. But now I understand that it's not. Well, most of the time it's not really the coach. It's the client because they're so fucking committed. They listen to everything. They just do what they're told. They follow a plan, and they get great results. But I used to think, oh my god, that coach, how does he do that? But really, like you say, working with Gen Pop, so much harder.
It's not to take anything away from the bodybuilding world. Cal, for example, at Pro Coach, if you guys don't know the Pro Coach boys, they're great. Cal's a really smart coach. I used to work with him at the Muscle Mentors. He's great. He knows loads more about bodybuilding and steroid stuff than I do. It's not my field at all. And so an amazing coach for that thing who knows a lot. But as you rightly said, like, so the difference he can make to a client is still there. Him versus a different bodybuilding coach, there may still be a difference. But a lot of the clients that they get come in would get a good result with a lot of bodybuilding coaches. The difference then might be between good and great. And when you're talking about Olympia level bodybuilding and stuff, that makes a difference. It still matters. Of course it matters. Just the reality is that those clients there are not that many of those clients, right? And if you want to go into that field, you have to know that Cal is your competition. Do you know how many client results you're going to need to churn out in order to compete with Cal? How long you're going to be having to work with non-bodybuilders before you have built enough of a client base and built enough results, built enough social proof, demonstrated what you do to the bodybuilding world enough that they'll be willing to hire you. And so in those first few years, you probably aren't going to be working with the people that you'd like to be working with as much longer term. And so even someone like Cal still started out working with gem pop people. He just always knew he loved bodybuilding, and that's where he wanted to kind of go with stuff. My contention is most people, even if they want to work with bodybuilders, probably aren't going to end up working with bodybuilders. That doesn't mean none are, but most people aren't. And so whether we stick and stay in the Gen Pop field, I mean, look, the reality is for myself, I coach mainly coaches these days. They're not Gen Pop, but I spent over 10 years working with Gen Pop people and eventually got to this thing. And I enjoy working with Gen Pop people, right? They're not something I felt the need, I have to move away from that. It just made sense for where my career had gone, that was the move now. And a lot of how I work with coaches as a coach or as a mentor is because of my experience working with the kind of people they work with, and the lessons I can give them and the insight I can give them and the suggestions I can give them for getting the most out of the clients they have. So yeah, I don't really know what my point is anymore. I think I'm just ranting.
No, it's good. It's all good. I'm very tempted to come along, to be honest, because I think I'll learn a lot. Because even this week with check-ins, I was struggling with a couple of clients who are very busy. They're only businesses. They've got kids. They're stressed. They've got fuck all time. They find it hard to follow certain things, like just sort of basic nutrition, really. But obviously, they're very stressed, so they try and they pick the first thing they see in the shop, which yes happens to be a highly palatable cake or biscuit. Do you know what I mean? And it's tough because for me, someone who has no kids, I'm single, all the time in the world.
Yeah,
it's easy for me, and I'm like, just do that, just do this. But for them, it's completely different.
And look, the reality is those ones are tough. And there is this bit where we go, I can't make someone do anything because I don't have a gun to their head, right? They're actually in charge. They're paying me. They can sack me if they want at any point. So many coaches act like dictators, and it's like, dude, you're not. Like, and you never will be. Like, even when a client comes to you and says, I'll do anything that you say, well, they still gave you the permission first because they said, I'll do anything that you say. You didn't just go to a random person on the street and went, do everything I say, right? And some clients will do basically everything that you say, right? You mentioned the muscle mentors a minute ago. I remember Luke told us of a client once that he had who said it went after I think it was like a couple of months of them working together, was like asking how things were going, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, you're good. I find like it's just taking a long time to eat the meals. So Luke was curious. It's like, okay, like what do you mean? It's like, well, just it takes a long time to eat 200 grams of raw potato. And what he'd been doing was eating 200 grams of uncooked, rock fucking solid potato. Because in his plan, Luke had given him 200 grams, meaning then fucking cook the damn thing, right? But weigh it uncooked in his plan. But he'd stuck to that for like months before Luke realized this was a problem. Because I mean, I'll be honest, that's not a problem I'd ever had with a client, right? So that could have happened for me, right? Because have you ever even just eaten slightly undercooked potato?
Anything I have, I was thinking, I've never actually tried uncooked potato ever.
Don't even try uncooked, right? Just like, I don't know, next time you're cooking some potato, stop it halfway through the cooking process and just take a bit and bite it for me and realize how hard and shit it is, right? So completely uncooked is just unbelievably
Imagine him kind of just gagging his way through these potatoes.
His jaw must have ached so much trying to break
And you're
down this fucking
talking
potato.
about like taking things literally as well.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
exactly.
20 grams of raw potato. Sweet. All right.
But those are the, we sometimes make these presumptions. Assumption is the mother of all fuck ups was a
Mm.
line that Steven Seagal taught us in Under Siege, and I like that one, right?
Same.
And
Yeah.
it's
Classic.
yeah, 100%. But it's a good lesson, I think, as a coach to really check: has my client understood what I meant with those words? Anyone who's ever done in-person coaching knows how how easy it is to say words and then your client to do something that looks nothing like the stuff you were
Mm.
trying to describe, right? Well, that's not just true of exercises, that's true of any dietary thing that you came up with and meant. When you're then working online with someone, that client who is struggling to not eat cake because they've got kids, the kids pissed them off, or whenever they're cooking their kids dinner, they find themselves nibbling at the nuggets and
Mm.
finishing the plate and all of that stuff. And it's like, all right, we've got to try and understand what goes on for that person a little bit more. Like, what were the gaps between meals leading up to that? Were they stressed? How long had it been since they ate within that? Was the kid pissing off? Do they have anything that helps them relax and chill out that isn't just food and alcohol? The amount of people who don't have anything in that list is upsetting. Even if we make our clients aware, hey, dude, and you can just ask them, like, what do you do to relax, unwind, chill out, etc., that isn't food and booze? And then wait and see what they come up with. And you'll find loads who have nothing on that
Oh
list,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
nothing on that list. And then they'll go, oh, yeah, because that immediately strikes them as a bit of a problem because it fucking should, right?
Mm.
But that doesn't mean you've now solved it. It doesn't mean that they now, just because you pointed out they don't have anything in that list, that they will now have something in that list. And you might even think, okay, well, probably we should come up with something in that. And they go, okay, yeah, yeah. And so they came up with an idea, whatever that idea happens to be for them. It's, I want to play a video game, or I'm going to listen to music, or I'm going to take a candlelit bath, or I don't fucking care,
Mm.
right? That doesn't mean they're going to do that every single time. Just because they came up with it and that sounded like a good plan doesn't mean it's going to succeed because it sounded like a good plan, right? Like everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the face, is an old Mike Tyson line. And life is going to punch these fuckers in the face and shit's going to come up. And they might have to get frustrated with themselves a bunch of times before they start to realize they want to do anything about it. Because some of the stuff that they might have to do about these things involve either planning some meals or deliberately eating at set times to preempt their hunger, or when they're feeling frustrated and annoyed, to choose to do something to first off notice their feeling, whatever that feeling happens to be, and two, they can engage in stuff where they try and reframe their thoughts about it. They could engage in something that recognizes and labels the feeling of, okay, I'm feeling lonely. Okay, so I'm lonely, even though those people are around. Well, what could I do that would soothe the lonely aspect of this particular thing? Well, it's probably going to need to involve people, isn't it? More than a fucking
Mm.
biscuit, right? Biscuits aren't people. And so they might make you feel a tiny bit better temporarily, but they're not really
Yeah.
solving the thing. All of that stuff is a process and takes time. And, this is a person who's sort of trying to do a bit of that while juggling all of the other complexities of their life, which involves, we just said, their kids. Well, probably their own well-being is not as important to them as their kids. So if there's a conflict in a moment of their life between my kid needs this and I should be doing that, well, their kid tends to win it, and probably rightly so. Who am I to tell them that shouldn't be the case? So this stuff is hard, and it involves you, rather than lecturing your clients, it's like, well, can I try and understand what their life is like a little bit more? And like, see if I can describe it back to them a little bit before I come up with a solution and go, okay, so then this is happening. And is that when we're making the shitty issue? And sometimes they won't know themselves. So you might have to do, there's a thing called a CBT thought diary, right? A cognitive behavioral thought diary. And first off, you're a PT. So it might be weird if you suggest that to a client who didn't realize they might have to fill in something kind of like that. And there might be resistance. So they might not want to do it.
Mm.
But if they can do it, it can be super useful because a lot of people don't know why they overeat. They don't know when they're doing things. They're just in their sort of word doing them. Well, a CBT thing, if we're not familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, cognitive just meaning the thinking side of things, the shit that's going on in your brain. Behaviors, meaning behavior. And therapy means it as a type of therapy, right? But this idea is that the thoughts we have influence the feelings we have. And those feelings and thoughts influence the behaviors we take. And then what we engage in influences the thoughts and feelings we have as well. So, if someone was sat in traffic. We've all got a mate who gets really fucking annoyed in traffic, and we all know other people who are very you that one, right? And then we've got people who are less like Rich who are serene in traffic. Well, the situation he is in is the same, but in one person is getting fucking annoyed about the thing, being like, this prick's making me late for work and this thing's happening. And, then they're getting agitated and blah, 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 right? Someone else is in the same situation, but is interpreting it differently. Maybe it's because they don't have a work meeting to get to. They're in a much more, maybe got laid last night, so they're nice and chill, right? So they've got a different thing going on for them. So it's not like the situation in and of itself that determines our reactions. It's how we interpret those situations, what's going on for us at that time. And so how do we start to understand what the problem is for someone when they overeat? Well, is it, okay, at a CBT thought diary, you might have a column that says, situation. So what time and where were they type thing? Who were they with? So I don't know, they have breakfast 7:30 a.m. with the kids in the kitchen, right? You've got that. You might then rank hungry, hunger scale, 1 to 10 it. How hungry are you when you're about to eat? 3, 9, right? We talk about hunger as though it's the same thing, but being hungry 9 out of 10 is pretty different than being hungry 3 out of 10. Most of us can make good decisions when it's 3 out of 10, but not when it's 9 out of 10. I know I suck. It almost doesn't matter where I am. If my hunger gets above like 8, broccoli can do one, right? Like I want chocolate, and donuts and that kind of good shit, right? So that's the hunger bit. Then there's a bunch of, what feelings might be coming up. Am I tired? Am I depressed? Am I anxious? Am I lonely? Am I jealous? Am I anxious? Am I paranoid? Am I bored? And I might rank those as well, because there's a difference between being lonely 4 out of 10 and lonely 10 out of 10. There's a difference between being bored 4 out of 10 and bored 10 out of 10. And so we might need to know that. Like 4 out of 10 is just part of life sometimes. That's not something I necessarily need to solve unless someone really struggles even with a 4 out of 10. And you might come across that sometimes. But okay, I'm just trying to understand what's going on. And then the thoughts. And God, does your client want to share this with you? Right? Because their thoughts might be, I'm worried that my partner's cheating on me and I've become an unlovable fat fuck and no one cares about me. And why should I even exist anymore? It can be really, really personal stuff. And have you, again, created the kind of relationship that increases the likelihood of someone sharing that with you? And that comes down to everything that you do, the content that you create, the interactions you have in WhatsApp, the interactions you have in the check-ins. Everything influences this. And so once you've then started to get that, you can now, after a few days or a week, start to analyze the diary, as it were, right? And go, okay, when do you make bad decisions? Okay, it's when we go 6 hours between meals. That should already suggest a solution to you, right? It's okay, it's when you feel this feeling, when you feel bored or when you feel lonely, because those are the ones we've been using. All right, well, we need a solution for when you feel bored and lonely that isn't cake. And I'm not saying that's easy. It's just what you need to do, right? Because that seems to be the problem. And any solution you come up with, if you don't first understand the problem, you're just throwing shit in the dark and hoping it sticks. Like the best course of anything is first properly analyze the problem, understand what is happening here. And again, that's a conversation. That's all this other stuff. Most people fail to stick to diets, not because of physiological reasons, but because of psychological reasons. And again, have we created the kind of environment where they might be okay telling us that about things they're embarrassed and ashamed of? Is it the kind of thoughts that they're having? Or what, do they need to reframe the thoughts? Do we as coaches have any cognitive behavioral type strategies? Do we understand mindfulness and when and how we might employ it or encourage someone to learn about it? Do they want to engage in those processes? Remember, they thought they were just coming to be given a meal plan and to start lifting some weights. They might not be ready for all this, even though you start to realize this seems to be the shit that's fucking you up more than the fact that, you've had 8 different meal plans. None of them seem to be solving the problem, Carol. We might need something else, but she might not want to hear that yet. This is all the stuff, right, that makes the reality of being a real coach who deals with real people. And that's what I mean by you need a broad skill set. Because, well, we've just been speaking a little bit about some of the diet stuff and maybe some of the training stuff. But if you're online, I think you said most of yours is online now. Well, you have to also be a content creator. And that's a whole different set of skills again, on top of that. That has absolutely nothing to do really with diet and training knowledge, particularly. It's a different thing entirely. So I think to succeed in this career, you can have a wonderful career. You can earn amazing money relative to almost anyone that you know. certainly relative to the length of time it took you to train as a PT and how long you might have to be working as a PT to earn 80K a year versus, well, how long would you have to work as a chemist before you get that? How long would you have to train as a doctor before you got that? How long would you have to work in an office or whatever? Like, sometimes we have a tendency to look down on things in the PT world, look down at like 40, 50K a year. It's like, that's great money in the vast majority of things. And it's skewed because we see people earning a lot more than that. And you can earn a lot more than that. But like, you can have an amazingly good career with pretty good cash by being good at a wide-ish variety of things. But you need to be good at that wide variety, or you will be chewed up and spit out like the vast majority of the fitness industry is. Like, the industry average for a PT is something like 18 months
Yeah.
between starting and quitting. And that's, I mean, how long have you been doing it?
God, since 2011.
Yeah. Oh, same as me in that case, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, 12 years.
that's skewed by us, right? Who've been doing it for like 13 years, right? So it can be this wonderful bit, but depending on where you want to go with all these things, you have to kind of figure out what skills do I need more of? Where are my gaps? Maybe who do I want to work with? Blah, 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 blah. So again, I have no idea what question I'm answering anymore. I think I've just gone on about 18 tangents.
But you've touched on so many decent things there, and it makes you realize how difficult this job is as well.
Yeah.
It's fucking tough. Like you mentioned, like psychology is a huge factor when it comes to coaching people, real people. Then there's the content creation, which is just a tiny little bit of, which has nothing to do with coaching really. That's just marketing. It's just getting yourself out there and getting your personality out there and I don't know, spreading your message out there, you know. It's so difficult. It's the psychology part which I think I struggle with the most, which is something I want to improve on definitely, because like especially now being mainly online, you have to deal with that a lot more because you're chatting to people on WhatsApp, you're doing video calls sometimes, you're checking in with people, you're reading someone's data off their Google sheet. It's not face to face. You can't see how they look. Are they
Yeah.
knackered? Do you know what I mean? So it's so much so much harder. So you have to ask the right questions and go from there.
Yeah, it is a tough job, and we sometimes treat it as though it's this really easy thing. And online and in person overlap, but they're also different.
Mm,
In person, you can pick up on lots of things just because there's a person in front of you,
mm,
and you pick up rightly, as you said, on their energy and their mood and whatever else is kind of going on. You also, in person coaching tends to have a bunch of people who are somewhat fine, let's call it, with not physically changing that much because they value turning up to the gym because they wouldn't turn up without you, right? They like you. If you've had clients for over let's call it an 18-month period as an in-person PT, they're probably not changing much after that point on average. Like, I had clients who were with me for a decade before I stopped in-person PT, and they didn't look any fucking different over the last 8-9 years of
yeah.
that thing. But they'd gone from 40 to 50 something and, didn't look any worse. And that was a win because most people are looking worse across that period. And they were friends. I'd see them several times a week type thing. They gave me shitloads of cash over a 10-year period. So from a business perspective, fucking great. You get on well. You talk about Game of Thrones, you chat shit about rugby and football and everything else that they care about. You often go to, their weddings, or they've had a baby, you hold their baby is now in fucking school and you're feeling old, right? It's you sometimes you go through divorces with a client basically, and all kinds of manner of stuff. And they keep turning up because they recognize training is good for them. They feel better when they do it, and they like you. And they'll stay until they die or you move away or you die, right? A lot of these people, and they're wonderful clients to have. But you can have a career where a lot of it is about the training and the personal interaction, and they're not interested in changing too much else outside of their life after a certain period of time. And that's fine. And that frustrates a lot of coaches. They keep wanting them to change so they can have, cool Instagram proof or something. And it's like, these aren't the people who wanted that. You're projecting what you would like for them onto them, not really listening to what they want. Whereas online, it is much rarer to have someone who is okay looking exactly the same for 8 years stay with you. They're going to have more desire to change, because you can't give them the in-person tweaks to training, which make the training experience with you directly a bit more valuable, because you ain't there with them. Then it's about everything else that comes along. So it tends to attract people who want to change a little bit more, usually visually, I would say, but it can involve other goals as well. And that stuff then almost inevitably involves dealing with all the shit that means people are carrying too much body fat. And that, as I just said, is mainly about the psychological stuff more than the physiological stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's the being invited out for a meal, and the meal turns into 18 beers, a meal, and then a takeaway at 2 a.m. And they enjoyed that, and then they didn't do anything the day after, but that was fun, and they don't have that much fun in their life outside of doing those things. And they're frustrated with what they look like and how they feel about themselves and what it looks like in the mirror at this point. But when changing from that, they also have to give up all the things that put a smile on their face, it seems. And that's a rock and a hard place to find someone. And how do you help them navigate that if you can? And then you've also got, if in the online space, you have to choose who you want to work with much more specifically. In person, you work with anyone who lives near to the gym that you work at and can afford PT. That is your demographic.
Yeah.
That is your niche, right? And that's one of the nice things about in-person PT. You get to work with a 23-year-old who wants to get jacked for a holiday, right? And then you also work with a fucking 79-year-old with 18 new knees, and everything else, right? And I used to really like that part of in-person PT. It meant I didn't have the same conversations all the time. Things were a bit different. I liked that. And it took me a long time online to realize that I needed what we call a niche, right? A group of people that were aimed at. Because I thought, like, I can help so many people. And it was true. I can help so many people. You listening to this can help so many people. But in the online sphere, you might be able to help them, but you can only help them if they listen to you. And if you try and talk to a 79-year-old with 18 new knees and a 23-year-old who wants to get jacked so he can get laid in Magaluf, it doesn't matter that we're going to talk about training and protein and stuff for both of those people. How they will relate to the things we're doing, the references that will resonate with them, the things that they benefit from or that they aspire to having are so different that you can't talk to them and hold their attention, because they won't care about the other person's thing. Talking about, like, this is going to be a great exercise for the biceps so you can look fucking awesome as you strut down the beach and da 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 da. It's like, well, 79-year-old lady just stopped listening because she doesn't fucking give a shit, right? But if I want to talk to, being able to do this so that, you don't fall over at night when you're going to the toilet like your friend Ethel, who then smashed her hip and died a year later. 23-year-old guy doesn't give a fuck about that, because obviously he doesn't, because nor did you at 23. Or if you're listening to this, if you are 23, nor do you now, right? So it's not that you can't help these people. It's that they won't listen to you if you try and talk to everyone, as the old cliche goes, you talk to no one. So the content creation thing has to have a more specific niche, because you can't hold the attention of people otherwise. And if you don't hold their attention, they're not going to know you exist, and they're not going to know how you can help them. So attention is first. And that's the big difference from an online perspective versus an in-person one, is you have to choose who you want to work with. And then you have to get good at creating content that resonates with them. So, I steal this from Mike over at Business and Banter. If you don't know the Business and Banter boys, Mike and Dan.
Yeah.
But Mike has a line that people need 3 things to want to buy something from you. And those 3 things are, they need to know and like you. They need to think that you can solve their problem or problems. And they need to be ready. His contention is that we can influence 2 of those, not the other. So if no one knows who you are or they don't like you, well, there's no further conversation because they don't know you exist, right? They might know and like you. They might think, he's a great guy, I like him, but he's not very good at his job. There's no proof he's helped anyone like me. He hasn't demonstrated that he understands me, blah, blah, blah. Then they're probably not buying anything from you either.
Mm.
But if they do like and know you and value what you do, it might not be the right time for them. I have one of my clients at the moment, Faisal, or I should now say ex-client, was supposed to be doing a photo shoot with us in May, and he was doing really well. Everything was going along swimmingly, and then his mother-in-law has gotten seriously ill. Don't know if she'll make it, type thing.
Oh no.
And that mother-in-law also looks after his kids a lot, and so now he's going to have to take and all that life stress. It's like, oh, what should I have said to Faisal to keep him as the client, to get him
Mm.
to the. It's like nothing. It's not the right time. Life got in the way in that. That's fine. I mean, it's not fine because it sucks for him, obviously.
Yeah, yeah,
But like, I don't need to have done anything different in that thing. It's not always the right time, as much as people like to say, if not now, then when? And there's some truth to that, but it's also not true that all times are equally fine. So, in the online space anyway, as well. I mean, as we're talking about this at this point, you might have someone. I mean, God, how long had you followed the Muscle Mentors stuff before you paid to come
well,
on a course?
since lockdown, yeah, so a good sort of 2 years. I did one
Yeah.
of your did like a free sort of online webinar thing.
Mm.
Completely mind blown from what you were saying. So I was like, I have no idea what you're on about, so I need to get into this.
Yeah.
That's where it came from.
You go, okay, so the lead gen time for Rich to have bought something from us from a business perspective was at least 2 years there.
Mm.
I would say online, most people are following the coach for at least a year before they reach out for something. And it varies. You can find people as low as 3 months and as long as like 5 years, right? Do you know how much content you have to fucking make and put out across that
Oh
period of time
God, I
before
know.
it's
Yeah.
hard, right? Whereas
Mm.
in person, you can go and wander around the gym floor, help someone on the gym floor, create a great exercise experience for them where they go, oh, my knee feels so much better now. And then you go, well, you ever thought about PT? And then they can become a client within 5 minutes of you meeting them. Because the lead time on, do they know and like you? Well, you can go and start talking to them and then they at least know you. Whether they like you depends on your personality and theirs, right? But you can just do that immediately. Do they value what you do? Well, have you helped create an exercise experience that is undeniably good for what that person values? So if their knee aches, have you shown them that you've just reduced how much their knee aches and it feels better? Cool. You've just demonstrated the like and no part and that you can solve their problem. Now it's just about whether they're ready, right? Whether they can afford it. And not everyone can. And so that's fine. Um, but you can do that within 5 minutes. You cannot pick up an online client within 5 minutes of them following you. That's not what happens. The lead time is longer. And so you kind of have to try and navigate all of that shit, and that can be difficult because it feels like, oh, I'm making a bunch of content for ages and ages and no one is reaching out and nothing's happening and what am I doing wrong, and right. But that's that whole uh, bunch of skills that are needed to run an online thing that are different to running an in-person thing. And it's like it effectively is marketing.
Mm.
You're not entitled to people to think you're an awesome coach just because you think you're an awesome coach and people who know you think you're an awesome coach. It's like, well, not enough people know you.
Mm.
If there's none of your personality in any of your content, what is to like or dislike?
This sort of goes on nicely to, I guess, one of the main questions I have about a certain coach out there who is doing really, really well. You know who he is. He posts information which is absolute shite, and we
Yeah.
mentioned about this in our Instagram messages, and you were going to say this is why he's so successful and what you're doing wrong, essentially. So it's
Yeah.
not. Yes, it is the information, and that's very, very important. But it's almost like it's how you put the information across and how you are on camera, right? So you know what about he's got over 3 million followers now. The information is pretty dog shit.
I like the fact you're avoiding it. I'll say his name. It's Eddie Abu.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah. Yeah, and this sort of it all comes down to why are people trusting what he
Following him.
says so much? Yeah, why are they sort of jumping on the whole? Oh wow, that must be true because he's saying it. Is it because he's got loads of followers, so people just can see that and see that he's respected and also
Um,
jump on that as well? Is it how he
no,
comes across?
it'll be all of the above. I
Mm.
don't think it's about how many followers he's got in and of itself. Otherwise, how did he get them in the first place, right? So that
Yeah.
might be a thing that helps it after a certain point, but it doesn't explain the initial growth. So it can't just be that. How he comes across, it's got to be something in that, and it's got to be something in the message. Well, what does he do? He's very clear. He's got clear opinions on shit,
Mm.
right? You either, marmite it, for want of a better description, right?
Mm.
It's almost the worst thing you can be online is meh, right?
I
Whether
think
it's,
that's me. I think that's me.
yeah, right? So whether it's, and you can call it kind of engagement baiting if you like, but you do sort of need to do some of it. And we can bemoan it all we like. It works.
Mm,
And as people who, I used to be someone who called himself like an evidence-based trainer and
mm,
shit kind of like that, right?
mm,
And I wouldn't recommend anything for clients that I hadn't read a research paper on and blah, blah, blah. And it never struck me to consider what the evidence said about what's effective for marketing and getting people to listen and care about stuff. Because there is evidence, right? And you're going to discover what works and what doesn't. And we can see it play out. And in the online space, well, even if this is just a story, right? Like I've got a Pepsi Max in front of me here. Stories are a place really for you to show a little bit of your life and to give opinions on these. Our take is kind of like people who interact with your stories regularly are more likely to buy something from you because you're building a personal relationship, right?
mm,
Just like we said on the gym floor, it's about getting to know people and them to like you. Well, again, and stories or posts or whatever, all the content, is there anything to like or dislike? Because I can't come up to you and have a conversation with you. You have to come to me in the online thing. So I need to put things out there that would make you want to say something to me, either laugh or smile or be like, fuck off. So this Pepsi Max can, I could just put up a picture of like, I'm on a call with Rich here and a Pepsi Max. And all right, that's kind of fine. But it won't do as well as if I stick up this Pepsi Max and be like, Pepsi Max is so superior to Diet Coke, it's not even funny. Anyone who thinks that Diet Coke is superior to Pepsi Max clearly had a frontal lobotomy at birth, right? Or something like that. And all I'm saying really is Pepsi Max is nicer than Diet Coke. But I'm trying to say it in a way that might make someone stop and laugh or have an opinion on it. Or people who love Diet Coke and think the opposite of like, you're fucking wrong,
mhm.
right? But it doesn't matter because with stuff like that, no one takes it that seriously. No one feels like I've, insulted the entire fiber of their being because I said that Pepsi Max was better than Diet Coke. So it's just having a bit of a laugh with it and creating a place where someone can reach out and be like, I agree, right? And blah, blah, blah. And then you get to gradually over time build a relationship with those people. And it might take years before they buy anything. They might never buy anything, but it doesn't matter. You've got people who are engaging with you a bit more, which means that part of the equation of the do they know and like you, we're at least ticking. Then if we can start putting out social proof, demonstrating with the stories and the content that we create that people can relate to it and they see themselves in it, that we go, oh, okay, now we start to have something that over time will play out into a successful business. So Eddie Abu does the opinion very well. He
Mm,
has a strong opinion, right? And I disagree with him, and I'm happy he exists because I can create reaction videos because I disagree with him,
mm.
and I can have a strong opinion on that, and I'm not forcing it. I genuinely disagree with him, right? But what he does very well is he doesn't fucking sit on a fence about
No.
anything. He doesn't talk in overly complicated language that his audience won't understand. He says, "This is fucking shit," right?
Lots of times, yeah.
Lots of times, right? So coaches, depending on who they work with, and again, this depends on who's that demographic. What are the language that they use? Like if your audience were Weight Watchers, you should say tummy, never rectus abdominis, right?
Mm,
Because they don't fucking ever say rectus abdominis. So it might mean the same area, but it doesn't matter. Not in their eyes. And it's in their eyes. That's the bit that matters. So can we talk in a way they would talk, they can relate to, they can understand, they can value? Eddie Abu does that very well for Gen Pop people. He uses a thing we would call the appeal to nature or the naturalistic fallacy, right? That natural things must be better for you. I mean, he conveniently forgets, poison ivy and various mushrooms that would kill you in a minute if
yeah.
you ate them or whatever, right? But there is a thing in human psychology that we are, generally speaking, drawn towards thinking that things that are natural are better for us than things that are artificial. And he plays on that. And when we read the back of fucking this Pepsi Max thing, when people can't pronounce stuff and they don't know what things are, there is a fear of the unknown. Whereas they know what an apple is, right? But they aren't going to know what phosphoric acid really is. Oh, it's got an acid in it. It's going to be terrible. Is that right? Yeah.
Mm.
So there's an element of playing on people's fears of the unknown, and those are human, and you are not going to change them because they're the same reason why people are to some degree fearful of immigration. It is a fear of unknown to a large degree, or different to a large degree. And this is not an argument for or against immigration in any way, shape, or form. I'm not interested in a political debate on that thing. It's just pointing out something new to us represents both opportunity and danger. Like if we go back in our past and we're a tribesman and we come across an unknown other tribe, are they about to rob us, rape us, and go to war? Or are they going to trade with us? And are we going to get it? You don't fucking know. It could be either, right? And so there is inherent in the new and the unknown. Some people who will take the new and the unknown as exciting opportunity, and some people who will take it as fearful, oh fuck, things are going to come out. And that's just part of human nature. And so with Eddie Abu, I think we try and learn the lessons of he's good at having opinions on things. He doesn't fluff his language around. He gets to the point really quickly. He looks a certain way, right? He's in a decent nick and he's like fucking in his 50s or some shite. Like he's an older gent, black don't crack and all that stuff. So he looks great, right? And that will help him a little bit within there. So I think you take some of those lessons. Do you look like a walking advert for the crap that you say to a reasonable degree? Doesn't have to mean you're jacked the whole time and blah, 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 but that will help. It's not a deal breaker, but it will help. Do you talk clearly in a way that your audience has a hope of understanding? Or are you obfuscating and using words like that people go, what? Right? In an effort to sound smart. It's like, get to the point, get to it quickly, hold their attention, talk about things they're interested in, have an opinion on the things that those people are interested in, right? All of that is stuff that we need to take from what Eddie Abu is doing. And hell, keep making reaction real. Actually, here's a point. Reacting to Eddie Abu is only useful if your audience know who he is, right? So I can do it because pretty much the whole fitness industry knows who Eddie Abu is at this point, right? I could do a reaction to a James Smith. I could do a reaction to a Brett Contreras, to a Mike Israetel. And people working in the fitness industry will know who those people are. If you work with Gen Pop, well, which part of Gen Pop, right? Like, are they people who look up to Kylie Jenner and Kim Kardashian? In which case, could I do a reaction to their workout or this thing that said that blah, 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 or this butt lift thing? Because those would be more sensible reactions if that is your target audience. If they're not that, is it? But I don't know, they look up to fucking Chris Hemsworth's workout was on whatever it happened to be on, or The Rock. The Rock's probably a good one, right? Can I do ones more about that? Like, what are the audience interested in? Because that's the stuff you need to have the opinions on, the reactions to, that will be more interesting. It's not uncommon for most coaches to have more engagement on their stories than their posts, often because their stories behind the scenes involve, the TV show that they're watching, and the stuff that makes up. Just think what you talk about in one-to-one PT sessions, right? The waffle, the bollocks, the stuff that, again, I think makes up the building the rapport that we said was essential as a coach to be able to actually coach people. Because if they've got rapport with you, they're more likely to be honest with you about whatever else is going on in their life. So you got to take that shit seriously. And I think that is a lot of what the stories are for, is building rapport by showing your likes and dislikes, what's going on in your life, amplify it a bit, have a bit of fun with it, right? The amount of people who send me Crocs, because I did a thing ranting about Crocs a while back.
I heard
right?
about this, yeah.
And I think Crocs are overrated and a piece of shit, and anyone wearing them should probably drown themselves. But I don't really think that to that degree, right? I dislike Crocs. I think they're fucking pretty shit. I don't love them. People who wear Crocs and socks in the gym also are taking it. Should probably just have their
that's just taking it to a whole new level, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just like, please stop. So I amplify that. I play up to it a little bit because of the interaction, because it's fun. You got to remember, people are primarily on social media for fun. Like, they're taking a shit and scrolling, right? They're trying to be distracted. They're putting a smile on their face. They're not there primarily for education. They might get a bit, but like, can you create stuff that might put a bit of a smile on their face that you might enjoy watching? Think about whose stories you stop and watch and pay attention to, whose posts you stop and watch and pay attention to. And what is it about those things? Notice when it's an opinion on something. Notice when it's a poll you can interact with and what the setup for the poll was, right? Notice when they tell you about a client result, how have they framed it? Have they told you a bit of a story about the person? And when they tell that story, is the story written in such a way that you reading it or watching it see yourself in? So these are the thoughts going through Sally's head, right? And it's really, you thought, you've looked in the mirror for the 53rd time today and keep noticing that roll that just sticks out over the top of the jeans that never used to be there, right? Or I don't care what it is, right? But can you tell it again? We started this earlier by talking about specificity in stories.
Mm.
Specificity in story is what lets people connect to it. That's the bit that makes them smile and go, yeah, I've done that. Right.
Mm.
And all the rest of that kind of thing. If we can include all that in our content creation, and then we can do it for a year, because remember the lead time is longer, we'll usually have a pretty solid place for a business. So yeah, those are the things you can steal from Eddie Abu that he does well, because he clearly does a lot of stuff well. Otherwise, he wouldn't be where he is. Even though the information he says is bollocks, how he
Mm.
presents it is very effective. If
So, yeah. So is that how misinformation, do you think, gets so far out there? Because misinformation spreads what, 4 times quicker than the real stuff? Is that where it comes from? Just because it's just how it's portrayed?
people think that, well, first off, we live in a world where it is currently very difficult to discern truth, I suppose,
Mm.
with more and more um, keepers of information. We see more and more biases in things, and whereas back in the day, a lot of the universal truths were agreed upon, regardless of which political end of a spectrum you went and got your information from. They would speak about the same facts, and then they would have different disagreements on said facts. We are living in a world where we don't even agree upon the ground facts. And this creates more and more echo chambers and more people disagreeing about what constitutes information versus misinformation. Because the people disseminating the misinformation would say, no, they're not. They're disseminating information, right? You've got to remember they're not seeing it usually, unless there's some kind of like, I don't know, Russian bot farm or something, as a deliberate attempt to generate misinformation. I think sometimes then people who have more of maybe a scientific bent and believe that type of thing a bit more think that the science says X, therefore why the fuck would anyone think otherwise? And there is an arrogance in that. And obviously everyone should think this and know this. And so there's almost very little attempt given to how you communicate. And it's an arrogance that is stupid. Because if they paid enough attention, they should go, ooh, we're not doing so well.
Mm.
Right. And how are these other things presented in such a way that means more people pay attention to them? And a lot of times we won't like the answers, because the answers involve stuff like humans have a negativity bias. We are way more likely to click on things that play up to fear and
Mm.
negativity than things that play up to positivity. And if you want to follow that, that should mean you probably create more negative sounding headlines, more negative based content that plays on negative emotions and pain. And the reality is, yes, that will get you more clicks. It will get more things. I had this conversation with Simon Mitchell once, actually, as to what constituted clickbait. And his take was whatever comes after the headline.
Mm.
So a clickbait headline is not thought of as clickbait if the article or the video that follows it is good. It's thought of as clickbait when you're like, you motherfucker made me click on you. And then nothing good. This was a fucking waste of my time. And I had to scroll through 18 pages. There's one point, and it's like, it's that.
I've done it, yeah.
Yeah. But we failed to then notice, but the headline worked, didn't it? Because you
Mm.
clicked on it, right? So his take is more, it's not that we need to change the headline or the clickbaity nature of stuff. It's our job then to do a better job with creating content that is both engaging and true.
Mm.
And I think sometimes we think, oh, if I just say truth, people will necessarily pay attention to it. And like, no, they won't.
Mm.
Right. You've got to think about how do you make it interesting to someone, engaging to someone? How do you tell it in a story they can relate to? How do you make it intriguing and invoke curiosity and evoke emotion through the thing with still truth being there? And I think if we can do that, then we'll be in a solid spot. But otherwise, we will continue to lose to misinformation peddling fucks who are good at creating the emotion, at getting to the point of having an opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it keeps us in a job, I suppose, and it gives us more ideas to the
Mhm.
content, right? And there's I guess there's no that was my question, that there's no way of really stopping it, is there? Because there's always going to be massive churns of people just spreading shit and posting crap like Eddie does. I mean, there's some truth to what he says, but it's so far on the other end of the spectrum. It's just insane. So,
So these are things you can make content on, right?
yeah,
You have an opinion on this, right? And you're allowed to say even within it, like there's some truth to what he says, but what you need to do with that is get to the point quickly and do it in a way that your audience can resonate with, right? So here's an Eddie Abu thing, like 3 things Eddie Abu is wrong about, and insert whatever the fuck you want to insert at the end of that. There's nothing special about 3, by the way, right? If you come up with 7, do 7. I don't care, right? Sometimes the coaches hear a specific number and think that's the number they have to do, and so they'll
yeah,
crowbar a bunch in until they get to
yeah,
no, right? It's and then go off on it, but make sure when you start the piece of content, have you scripted it? Do you know what you're going to say ahead of time so that you're not wasting time and waffle? If you went back 6, 7 years, you had more time to waffle on Instagram because it wasn't
mm,
as competitive. Other content wasn't as good. My first Instagram post involved like fucking Tupperware tubs with peas in it, right? And it's really shit. Uh, but that was fine because it was 2015 or something.
mm,
Um, that you there's no way you'd post that post that now. Stuff evolves, and what used to work, you're not guaranteed for it to work now. But if you can zoom out and go, well, what are the principles that govern human attention? And then how do I weave what I think they need to know that's going to be helpful for them through that, still keeping the view of what's going to hold their attention, what's going to keep them interested, what's going to give my personality through it. How do I show that this is right? Because for most normal people, you're saying words and Eddie Abu is saying words, and they don't know that one is right and one is wrong necessarily. You're like, yeah, but mine has science. It's like, that just sounds like mine has Jesus, right?
mm,
Like it doesn't mean anything to anyone. People who believe in science think that evoking the word science is persuasive in and of itself, but it isn't. It's only persuasive to people who already think science has all the answers to everything. So
mm,
basically, people who are already thinking like you. And so it's not as persuasive as you think, right? So if you wanted to use science, well, then how do you weave science through it? And well, this study found that blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. But how do you do that in an engaging way? You can't just read
yeah.
me the fucking abstract of a study. That's going to be boring for everyone. Josh Taylor's not bad at doing this. If you wanted to check out someone who weaves
I
stuff.
listened to your podcast with him. Really good.
Yeah. So you can absolutely do those bits. Ben Carpenter does it as well.
Yeah.
So you can. I think you just, again, a lot of this stuff, it has to be given more deliberate thought. I think a lot of coaches don't do enough planning with their content. They just
No.
press a red button and hope magic comes out of their mouth. And it's
Yeah.
like, it probably won't. It's really hard to be interesting on the fly.
I plan. I do. I do a lot. But I was going to say, do you think there's some truth in, for example, right? If I post a reel and 1 out of 20, it's pretty interesting, it's pretty engaging. Someone looks at it and think that's quite cool. Go on his profile, sees I've got a very low following, and then sees Eddie's reel. Goes onto his profile, sees he's got 3 million followers, and thinks, oh well, he must be telling the truth because
I can't see the situation whereby they would have gone immediately from yours to immediately
no,
to his, had that
no,
thought.
that's a very vague example. Yeah,
Yeah. So I would say that's a concern that doesn't matter.
yeah,
Whether it's true or not, so what? What do you do with it? As
yeah,
you
true.
as the content creator, you as the business owner, you as the coach, that's worrying about shit that goes on in other people's head.
Yeah,
And it's all you need to worry about is creating good, persuasive, interesting, fun content that a particular type of person would really enjoy.
mm,
And if you can do that over time, let the chips fall where they may.
mm,
Yeah, because otherwise, I think otherwise you start worrying about shit that, yeah, I understand having the thought, But it's a bit like, oh, what if Sharon at the office thinks I look, ugh, right? And
Mm.
it's like, it's not a normal thought for someone to have, but engaging with it isn't helpful.
No, no. I guess I'm just sort of trying to figure out how and why misinformation and bad and poor information gets spread out so easily.
But it's more emotive than
Yeah,
good information. And human beings aren't rational.
yeah.
We like to think we're rational. We're not. We're primarily emotive.
Mm,
And to the point, if you ever go and look at studies where emotional centers of the brain have been knocked out through stroke or tumor and stuff like that, people find it basically impossible to make decisions, and including decisions that you that sort of feel a bit irrelevant. Like, would you prefer mint ice cream or vanilla ice cream? They get stuck there for hours because they can't, because we're not rational creatures. We're emotive creatures with the capacity for some rationality. And everyone knows that, because the moment you go down a dark alley at night, it doesn't matter that statistically nothing's going to happen to you, right? The moment you step on the scale and the weight's gone up, as a PT who understands weight fluctuation isn't just about fat, it doesn't stop that little voice going, ah, does it, right?
yeah.
Yeah, like you can rationalize on top of that, and you should. I'm not saying we're not rational in the slightest, but I am saying that a lot of people tend to overvalue how persuasive rational stuff is in and of itself if there's no emotion in it. So if you're making more rational content, you still have to give and pay attention to emotion, because it's more persuasive, it's more powerful. It's why we care more about stories than data.
Mm,
And of course we care more about stories, because you only have to look at children. Everything we do is a story. Everything we watch is a story. Almost
mm,
everything we read is a story. And it's engaging from the moment a child is like 6 months old, right?
mm,
Through to the day you die, we love stories. And stories are emotive more than they're anything else. And we learn through them. And so we can learn and we can weave good information through it. But I think if you try and take that idea of not wishing the world was different, but recognizing what human nature is, you tend to feel a bit more comfortable and confident and stop going like, well, misinformation is a bit of a problem for sure. My job is, because I'm not a policy creator, is just to create good content that people want to consume and put the science in it, but not make it, oh, I just have to make content that is correct and assume that will work.
mm. So how does someone, let's say someone's listened to this, who gets their information from? By the way, have you got time for another question or
I
two?
got about, yeah, I got another 10 minutes.
Cool. Okay, perfect. I've got two questions, then
Go for
then you can leave.
it.
If someone's listened to this who gets their information from podcasts, Instagram, whatever, YouTube, socials, how do they know what is correct and what isn't? Who do they go to?
You're going to be depressed by my answer, because my answer is they don't. The analogy I use for this one is, do you know how's your car mechanic knowledge?
Shit.
Same, right? Same as
Mm,
mine, which is why I use
really?
this example. I could take my car to a garage and they could make up parts of the car and tell me there's stuff wrong with it. And I would go, okay, because I don't know enough to know
Yeah.
whether they're talking shit or not. And I think this is an intractable problem. I don't see how you solve it, because you'd have to know everything about a lot of stuff to know how to appraise a claim.
Mm,
Most PTs also don't know how to read a research paper, really. And yet the ones who like science will read a bit of it, but if you ask them, how'd you come up with a p-value or a p-ratio, they wouldn't know. And how and why certain things are done within the study methodology. And so even though they read research, they're not really the best place to evaluate the research. Or if they do, it's like, yeah, but I don't know enough about that little subfield of, you know, molecular biology to know what to do with that little bit of information that I made. And so I think this is one of the reasons I think it's more persuasive to be in shape than not, by the way, is we use whether you're in shape as a proxy to tell me whether you're full of shit.
mm,
And of course it's not correct, but it's not an argument about whether it's correct. It's an argument about what it looks like for someone who has to use heuristic to make a decision. Like, heuristics are just shortcuts in the brain that can go wrong. And if you ever look into psychology stuff, cognitive distortions or something that are often very present, whether that's catastrophization or all or nothing thinking or perfectionism, mind reading. There's like a laundry list of these things. And when I was first going through treatment for OCD, you learn lots of them, and they're good to learn about. But the reason they exist is because your brain can't make long, drawn out thoughts about something for every decision it has to make. Like if you have to cross the road, you look to the right and your senses immediately see something or they don't see something. Let's say they see a car coming. Without you really properly thinking about this, your brain has already gone, I can make it or I can't, right? But if you think about how many things does it have to process to decide that? Well, what kind of make a car is it? And that's going to play a bit of a role, right? Like, okay, looks like a boy racer coming down the road versus an old lady. Can I tell by the way they're driving? What's the road surface like? Is it icy outside or is it just a kind of normal day? What kind of shoes do I have on as I'm doing that? Have I got DOMs in my legs from a workout that I just did? Blah, 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 blah. How good's my eyesight? Can I hear anything else? I just looked this way, but did it sound like the noise was over there? And then I have to figure out what's the right amount of muscular contraction in all of the muscles that I have. You aren't going to function that way. You cannot function that way. So your brain needs shortcuts. Those shortcuts are known as heuristics. You read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman if you want to know more on this kind of thing.
Okay.
And these shortcuts are great. They allow us to function in the world, but they're prone to error. And I don't see that changing is the thing. And so, what can people do? Man, if I had a good answer for that, I'd probably be on all the TV shows, making a shitload of cash about here's how you stop this problem. I don't know, because I think any answer you come up with requires some prior knowledge of something.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right?
Yeah, like you can sit here and go, okay, just because something is natural doesn't mean it's necessarily good for you, right? Fair enough. So appeals to whether or not you can pronounce a bunch of ingredients, I think, are dumb, because I can't pronounce any of these ingredients in Mandarin, but they haven't changed, right? So my ability to pronounce something or not has absolutely fuck all to do with what it does and whether it's good or bad for me. But is that persuasive to anyone who doesn't already think that way? I don't know. Like if they've come this far into this conversation, they likely already agree with what we're saying. Right. So I think you have these kind of like longer form bits where they like you, they like the way that you think, you talk through all that stuff, and they kind of go, you know what, I feel like I go with him on that. I get that conclusion. That is the stuff where we can be rational on top of things. But often you come across that thing where people just double down. You challenge them on something, you present some bit of research or whatever, and they just disagree harder. Right. It's not like we're persuaded by just that. A lot of times, and this is true of coaching, by the way, as a quick thing on it, is you've got to pick your battles as a coach. Your job is not to be right as a coach, it's to be helpful. And so like, I had a client who believed in homeopathy. I think homeopathy is a crock of crap, right? But he found it useful for dealing with his back pain, and he'd had back pain for 7 years. Well, should I immediately challenge him on that? Or should I just go, okay, he's doing that, that's fine, right? Let's work on the gym stuff and all the other things that we're doing. And then maybe over time, we might deal with the homeopathy if it's appropriate. And I never dealt with the homeopathy. He gradually decreased his homeopathy use because his back pain improved because of the other shit we were doing. Whereas if I'd have challenged him on it because I wanted to be right, I'd have pushed him away. I'd have put the fucking cart before the horse and all that stuff. It wouldn't have been me being very good at my job. Whereas if I can create something that he goes, oh, that does feel better. Well, now I've created the conditions where he might listen to me. I think similar things in training terms, right? Like the dumbbell lat raise, when we're teaching biomechanics, I get people to try and experience something first or have a moment of, that's weird. Because that moment, that experience, that buys me some time to do the slightly more boring bit where we're explaining why. I think most people go wrong because they do the explaining why before getting the interest. And I think with content, whether that's stopping misinformation or trying to get clients, how do you create the, ooh, that's weird? How do you create the experience? How do you create the emotion first? And then you can pivot to the more rational bit afterwards. But when you do it the other way around, it doesn't work as well for most people.
Yeah, I was gonna mention. I guess it can come down to trial and error. So someone hearing something, giving it a go, liking the sound of it, giving it a go. If it works, cool, carry on. If not, then okay, it's not working for me. I'm going to try something else. Okay, I heard this tomorrow. I'm going to try that instead.
Well, I think even if we really think about science stuff, and I love science, right? I'm a physics nerd and all the rest of it. But how do I know that the world is not flat? Like, personally, how do I don't actually.
Mm.
I've taken it from all the scientists I trust and like the sound of and everything else and go, all right, well, I've done equations for physics and I've calculated gravity or I've calculated torques and I've tested them with my own. It comes out correct. The prediction is right. And the cars I go in and the planes I go in all seem to function by these things that everyone else is describing as the laws of physics, and they seem to work, and I've experienced them. So I'm then expanding that and trusting that the world is in fact round because it feels like it makes sense to me. But if you ask me to prove that the world is round, me to prove it, I can't. I don't know how to, right? And so how many things do you believe from science that actually really what you're doing is an appeal to faith? It's your faith in science, right? Because you couldn't personally prove it. And I think if we can keep that in mind, we stay a bit more humble.
Mm.
We stop being as frustrated with people who aren't persuaded by science in the way that we might be, because we recognize, oh, fuck, I'm also susceptible to this thing too. And again, I'm not saying science is the same thing as religion because it's not exactly the same thing. But if you don't think there's an overlap in various places, I would like you to prove mathematically, scientifically prove all of the various science things you believe. Have fun with that.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, I think you have covered an amazing amount of topics on this episode. In your opinion, what does the future hold for social media? Do you think it will all sort of suddenly just die, or do you think it will
No,
just continue and continue, grow and grow and grow?
I don't think it'll die. I don't see that happening. It will definitely continue to grow / evolve. What
Mm.
that evolution looks like, I don't know. Could it be a bunch of ever smaller echo chambers? Possibly. What is the role of AI and political motivation in international geopolitical warfare start to look like for that? How much of our disagreements are real people versus antagonists
Mm.
set up by other things? I have no idea. What does AI do for that? No idea. How does AI police itself? No idea. Right. So there's a bunch in there. What does it look like as virtual stuff maybe starts to take off? Does it take off? Because some of the Oculus stuff and Meta stuff doesn't look like it's taken off as much as
No.
maybe we thought like it might. But is that going to continue that way or not? I don't fucking know. Will there be combinations of short form and long form types of social media? I think so. I think so because I think that's human. So, YouTube, for example, much more long form, podcasts, much more long form. Both of those are thriving. Podcasts and YouTube are bigger than ever, but equally so is TikTok.
Mm.
And TikTok is fucking short form. So I think there will be a variety of them. I think the problem of who controls narratives and truth, I don't know how that plays out. Because at some point you need some, like it used to be, I don't know, the BBC and what have you. Well, now, and then Joe Rogan, for example, started as the outsider type thing to that. But Joe Rogan gets more views than all of the media outlets now.
Mm.
And so he is now a gatekeeper to things. And so do you then, a lot of people come across other people to see and to check out and to find via that source. So he's just replaced a different form of media. To what happens when you play that out across? I don't know. I don't think human nature changes particularly. So I think the only things that can work have to work because they play on who we actually are. And so, as depressing as people might find that, that's kind of on you as a species, right? And I don't think that particularly changes. But yeah, man, I don't. It's not going away. What it means and how it evolves, fuck knows. But
Mm.
as a coach, I think you have to try and go with it, roll with it in one way, shape, or form.
Mm. It's a exciting but also quite terrifying thought. God knows where it'll go, but it's interesting to think about. I think it's good to leave it there, mate. To be honest, I think it's been a fascinating podcast. You're a very clever guy, which is why I thought it'd be good to bring you on and chat about some cool stuff. But I really appreciate your time, mate.
Pleasure, mate.
Do you want to just let people know where they can find you if they want to sort of look at your work, look at your stuff?
Easiest place to find me is Instagram, and just search Paul Standell. That's Standell. You will find me there. You could also search the PT Project, which is the company I run with James Sutton. So yeah, Instagram is the easiest place to find us there.
Cool, nice one. And I'll be in touch about the PT Project weekend for sure.
Awesome. Cheers, buddy.
Okay, cool. Nice one.
Thanks, mate.